heaven. From the top of the hill you see home. Now you might feel like a stranger, but know that it won't be long. 'Cause there ain't no reason to hurry to that other shore.
Done. Wonderful. Hi. I'm going to use my voice now. I know, isn't it terrible? Um, we're transitioning to the second part of our think tank today, which you can see me there. I'll be talking. Thank you, everyone, for such fantastic 27 minutes of silent engagement. I loved it. And I appreciate following along some of these things. Where do I look? We're not used to this language in Zoom. So thank you for playing along and holding on, even if some things got lost. I'll take the feedback and work it into my next lesson. Okay, so what I'd love to do, we're going to, let's see, what's the right order? Thinking through my lesson plan out loud in front of teaching artists is something that's never happened before. Okay, what I think we should do is I'm now going to introduce myself with my words, and then we'll go into breakout rooms before a break at the hour. We'll take 10 minutes just to breathe and do your own thing, and then we'll come back for a more in-depth discussion of these concepts and what we'll be building together. So I'm going to share the screen and go into a little introduction about myself. This is me. I was that picture. I'm glad here. I should put the glasses back on so I match. Okay. I'm located in Brooklyn, which is Lenape land. Oh, I'll change my background too, so we're not confused here. There we go. I'm the artistic director of Broken Box Mime Theater, which is a nonprofit based in New York City. We've been around 10 years and we do a lot of education work and a lot of stage work. And over time, those things become more and more the same, which I love and I think is a good sign. We do a modern reinvention of French pantomime. So we don't use words or props, or sets, but we do we are based in a naturalistic modern style of acting. I'm a teaching artist with Broken Box, with the International Rescue Committee, and I've worked also with Clowns Without Borders. That's what made me excited and inspired to create this work, this nonverbal teaching work. I was on a trip with Clowns Without Borders with refugees in Texas. It was the day of the election in 2016. Emotions were flying high. And there were refugees from many different countries, all in the same room. And my task was to do mime and communicate without words for the entire session. And the first thing and the most powerful thing that I noticed was that folks could share their sense of humor with each other for the first time since they had arrived in the States with each other. The person from Syria and the Uyghur person could both make jokes with each other when they passed an invisible ball and it hit them in the face by accident. That kind of clown, or my lens is mime or physical theater, physical storytelling, allows us to express ourselves beyond words in a space like that. It blew my mind. And then back in New York here, in my work with, I should have written too, A-Step, Artists Striving to End Poverty. They're about to change their name, but I know them as A-Step. Through A-Step, I've taught groups of unaccompanied minors that arrive at the US border. They're all Spanish-speaking kiddos, and I don't speak Spanish, and my teaching with them is entirely silent for the entire hour. Which gets to be kind of wild, and there are lots of backup plans with flashing lights. We'll get into that in the second hour, but that has also brought me to this work. The kind of teaching I do and the work that I like to develop, physical storytelling, that's how I describe my mime practice. I've taught different courses at the New School, developed curriculum called Languages of the Body. We have Broken Box has an embodied social emotional learning curriculum about how the body processes big feelings. And right now I'm in the middle of teaching an inclusive body language 101 for the disability community. That does not prioritize neurotypical body language, but instead gives us a shared spoken language and experience to see the different dialects in body language. Now, look, those are all your avatars. There's even a witch in the room about your perspective. And here's where I'll ask you to write in the chat again. Where are you calling from? For those who arrived late, I would love to hear from you too. What is your medium or mediums or focus of teaching artistry? For example, I might write physical storytelling or mime or all of it too long to write. Any of that's fine. And what brought you to today's session? And as you write those, I'll voice a few of them out loud. Arizona, Somerset in the UK, Atlanta, Honolulu, verbally reliant, want to find more nonverbal practice, multidisciplinary curriculum, social emotional learning with disability community, Matt, awesome, Minneapolis. I'm in Los Angeles. Peter from Ghana. Thank you, Peter. And let's see, Eva from the Philippines. We have St. Louis. Work with kids with profound special needs and also those who speak languages other than English. Musician, dance, growing interest in physical storytelling. Integration into my teaching artistry. Thank you. Panama, but reside in Colorado. We have Boston, Maine, Boulder. Yay, we were just in Boulder. Broken Box was in Boulder. Connecting with teaching artists. Awesome. Using body as a creative form. John from Ghana. Rosie, you saw the show. That's great. Bringing more movement and clowning into my social practice. We have someone from Canada, Treaty 7 territory, Theater Via Pressed. More tools for online facilitation. We all speak movement. I agree, Allison. India. Beautiful. The body is the first vehicle of learning and expression. Yay. I have had a taste of how powerful nonverbal work is on Zoom. Beautiful. Keep writing in the chat so we can save it later, but I'll pause speaking there. And let's see, we were going to come back to this. You know what we'll do is after, yeah, okay, I'm going to stop share and to head into the next section. I would love to break if you would like. You can opt in to those small breakout rooms or you don't have to, but it's a nice way to meet each other now that we've started to introduce each other in the chat. We'll do breakout rooms of 5 people and I will share a few guiding questions. I'm going to ask that when we go into breakout rooms, there are pros and cons here, but bear with me that we don't go around and say the names to start. But when you want to share something, you say who you are, where you're from, and then share what you have to share so that there isn't the first pass around and then getting into conversation, but we get right into conversation. And as we do those breakout rooms, Madeline, thank you for helping with that support today. The first question is what it's a bit what I said before, but I want you to be able to voice it. What did you notice about those 27 minutes? What did that feel like to you? And if you can describe what you thought about or what you felt, and both of those things, that would be great. So reactions, responses to the first moment, the first work together in silence, and off you go into your breakout rooms. If you decide to stay here and are not in a space to chat today, or you're at a cafe or whatever it is, no problem. We'll come back in 10 minutes. Welcome back. Yay, welcome back. Okay, I think we're all back. Yes. Hooray. I know that was very quick and there is an art to the breakout room, but I'm glad that you got to meet each other briefly and share some quick reactions, a hot take, as the kids say. Great. I would love to open the floor now briefly. We're going to take a break at 2 and come back just to give you a span of what's to come. We're going to come back at 2 or 2:05, depending on when we go to break, take a 10-minute break. Then I have a few slides to talk very specifically about kind of the theory, breaking down my practice and some of what we did already, and then open us up into discussion of the greater resource toolkit that I would love to make as the working group that comes out of this think tank. So there will be a little bit of me talking afterwards, then group discussion, and we'll have one more opportunity for breakout rooms before coming back together. Okay, so that being said, let's take a few minutes and share out if anyone would like to. Feel free to unmute yourself and share anything that popped up in your breakout room that stood out, or if you had a thought that you didn't have the chance to share and you would like to share it. The question is reactions to those first 27 minutes, things that came to your mind, or interesting points that your colleagues may have brought up.
I'll share. Hi, my name is Elise May. I'm in Long Island, New York. Hi, Eric. And first of all, the first 27 minutes were such a joy to me to be given permission to be silent. It took a stress off of me because I, as a theater teaching artist, use words a lot of the time. I also, because I work with immigrant and special needs populations, use nonverbal communication as well. But just that, what we discussed in our group was the creative space that silence gives, the permission and the creative space. So that's what I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I just kind of want to add to that. I appreciate Elise and Christina for their wisdom and time and the chatting. It was great. And I'm thinking, along with that creative space, I keep thinking about that idea of, wellness, of being able to, just be okay in silence. It's part of silence and stillness go together. And they're both two things that human beings have a very hard time with, and that it's important to practice silence. And Elise pointed out as we came back into the larger room that it's the whole idea of communication in silence is powerful, very powerful. They say in the arts, it's the silences and the stillness sometimes that are the most powerful in a piece of music and a dance work. So, the power of it and the need to have it be something that the people, the students, the young people, whoever we work with, they see that silence is okay. It's not just about sitting down and being quiet, as you've been told all your growing up, but there's a good side to that silence that we should nurture.
Thank you. Lovely thoughts. More. Yeah, Eva.
Yes. Yeah, I'd like to just comment on the fact that we're in Zoom, and it's like bursting literally out of these boxes, and the use of the chat and allowing us, like I said earlier, I didn't think I was here at 2 a.m. So I thought it was like an ordinary day. But its potential, especially for children. I deal with a department that deals with a lot of teaching and children. So this is great for a technique that we could use. But also I do arts for therapy. And silence, as was mentioned earlier, it makes that entire thing really more workable and helps us to focus. Thank you for this.
Thank you.
Elise in our group reminded us that less is more, and we couldn't agree more with that thought because we are all very much in tune to our voice and our bodies and our gestures as creative people, as educators, and some of us like to ramble on and on and on and on. I'm getting into the practice of even telling my students, whether in person or via Zoom, I'm gonna be quiet now. I'm gonna turn off my voice, and it's, and I also changed my intonation. It's like, now it's time for us to just focus, and I'm gonna leave you to it, and I'm gonna do my project, and we'll come back in 10 minutes. And honoring silence as a creative space. And I was sharing that pre-pandemic, when I used to come home from teaching many, many hours and in a physical form and driving home, I would come home and tell my family, I just need 20 minutes. Like, I need to lock myself up in the bedroom. I need 20 minutes. We'll deal with dinner. I will make spaghetti in meatball. I'll make it happen. I just need to decompress and leave the chaos behind.
Yeah. And
then enter this, like, my home space through silence. I just need to lay in bed, and it generally took like 5 minutes, really, but but honoring my space and my need for quiet time. And I tell people, my home and the absolute stillness and quietness that happens here, it is precious, because later when I'm on, I'm really on. I'm really on and fully present. So yeah, the silence, the power of silence is really, really important to consider.
Thank you. Awesome. Thank you, Christina. Some nice thoughts in the chat too. I know sometimes it's like tied between who am I looking at versus reading the chat. Feel free to sort of look at the chat as a parking lot for the thoughts that we have. Yeah. Anything else to share before we go on break? Yeah, Barry. Hi.
In our group,
We'll do Barry, then Linda. That's great.
Thank you. In our group, we shared that sometimes there was some nervousness or uncertainty within that multimodality, and also being aware that there's time lags in the Zoom. So trying to make sure that I'm keeping up and knowing what to do. And there were some moments where people weren't sure if there were technical difficulties, because some people were getting messages and other people weren't, and kind of figuring out where we fit into the entire thing. And we're so used to getting verbal instructions about what's going to happen, and that there were moments when it was unclear, but we also acknowledged that we kind of, just went with it and understood, and everything became clear as we went on.
Thank you. Yeah, and to note, and for transparency, and to note too, and helpful to share with teaching artists. So a lot of these games I've done in person, and many of them, we did 4 games, I think, and some of them I have not done on Zoom. So the things that will happen differently for me, the writing, also I think helpful for teaching artists to know, right? The writing, the prompts took way longer than I thought, which I should have known, but I could have prepped that with Madeline in advance and done all 20 of those prompts that we had. The other is I ended up doing an extra game of act out discovery, because I was kind of inspired in the moment, but it's difficult to be inspired in the moment when you don't have, I had taught that you look here, right above my head for the instructions. Those instructions started to be via the chat, which I also think is something that I would change for next time. Those were the 2 big standout things to shift. I also think I went a little fast. I think I could have slowed down and would probably do that second time around. And I love that it's designed so that, I told Madeline in advance, if someone says what's going on, tell them there's going to be another game in 3 minutes, hang on, and we'll join in at that one. That was part of the plan today too, to know that sometimes, exactly like you said, Barry, I trusted that this group would sort of hang on and stick around, even if something wasn't quite clear. But so, on the back end, those are the things I would definitely change teaching it again. Linda, you had something to share.
Yes, thank you. So the one thing that stood out for me that I shared in the group was this high level of engagement right away, in that, we all come from different parts of the globe, and we might be speaking different, but right away we were sharing needing to be attentive and focus on each other. And another participant shared that, the appreciation that you, Becky, didn't tell us what you were going to do, that you walked the talk and you jumped in with the action. And the second part, I wanted to kind of bolster up what other people were sharing about silence. And in my practice of forum theater, as in my teaching artistry, I use nonverbal to collaborate and problem solve. And I just wanted to share that there's a lot of resistance with teachers and with participants in that when we do the noticing and questioning after a certain exercise that happens in silence, although they've done the exercise and achieved the goal, some of the reflections are, well, if we had a chance to talk and discuss, we would have ... So I just find it, it's part of the work, I guess, in continuing to do these types of exercises and the work that more people will embrace the power of silence and the potential of collaboration in silence.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I love
That's
that, Linda. And you went a little bit in and out with your Wi-Fi, but I think we caught everything. I think I followed along what you were saying, so I think we're good. Just letting you know that. And thank you for the offering there. The other one just thing to pull in that we'll talk about in the second hour is what a great thing to put in this toolkit that I want to build. What are the responses if a student says, well, if I was able to talk, I would have done all this and the other. What's the menu of ways to respond to that in the moment of like, well, let's brainstorm all the things that happened because you weren't talking, or how do we shift it? And what are the various like responses? That's exactly why I'm excited to do this, is because y'all will have those experiences that will be the content of this toolkit. Eric, hi.
Hi. I just wanted to speak one quick appreciation for that final gesture of yours, which you just told us you improvised, to move us from the kind of literal physical work that we had been doing to an abstract exploration of not show discovery, but be discovery, that by elevating, or let's say expanding, it was a real step. It was a real artistic challenge for me. I found myself going, oh yeah, right. Now I'm working in another way. And I slipped into this kind of metaphoric, analogical work where before everything had been somewhat literal. And it was so elegantly done, and it was an embodiment of discovery itself. So whatever that intuitive impulse of yours to add that at the last moment, that's like one of those great teaching artist moments when you just kind of get this notion that is exactly this organic expansion to creatively challenge your participants in a new and richer way. It was really just a beautiful example.
Thank you. Y'all, Eric Booth just told me that. Isn't that cool? Thanks, Eric. That's great. That's so great. I think, and this is one of the points that we'll talk about in the second hour is, I mean, I was like grinning ear to ear writing this lesson plan yesterday. The final draft and the final tweaks is like, that the body can be so practical and the body can also be so expressive and metaphorical. And for kids, that is how I like to scaffold in the classroom, to start with something very practical so that we don't jump immediately to express your feelings. We all, I mean, the connection to body in terms of identity and development and trauma and privacy and all those things are so tender and so charged that to go to an emotional place first to create the culture of the classroom and to give yourself practical things, kids follow along. We're brushing our teeth, like they know how to do that. So once their body is moving, it's a much easier ask to say, now let's become a flower, or now let's feel joy, or whatever it is. And that turning that up as this class goes along, I think is such a useful tool in this kind of work that can be so vulnerable, especially as soon as they hit puberty, and then like every exercise you had is different because they want to cover their whole body up, yes. Okay, we're going to, no problem, Lynn, that you have to go pick up your kids. I'm glad they have a ride. We're going to take 10 minutes and come back at 2:11 my time. 10 minutes for you, whatever 11 is after your hour. We'll see you then. So I wrote out for myself sort of a script, of what slides I was going to share, and essentially stage directions for myself, covering up the camera so that you could see my virtual background, so you can read it, then uncover it, say, did you get it? This kind of thing, and kind of giving myself reminders of the physical gesture that I would do as we went through. I decided not to do share screen just for the Zoom curious out there. I decided not to do share screen because it makes my face so small, and I wanted to interact with the slides. In the classroom, the whiteboard or the chalkboard is where I do all this at the beginning. So I was trying to figure out a way to do that. So, and interacting with my virtual background is the way I attempted to do that. Okay, the first thing we did was a follow along. Having the two hands out in front and looking around and seeing if someone puts their hand up is how I almost always start the follow alongs that I do. And once we start with just kind of warming up the body, eventually we got into, I didn't go into the shoulders up and down stuff. I went right into the facial expressions of those 6 quote unquote universal expressions of emotional states across culture. It's been proven by various folk, the Unmasking the Face by Paul Ekman, I think it is. Is it Ekman? Yes. He talks about, he was like a big old facial expression guy, started in the 70s and 80s, I believe. He's what that show Lie to Me is all about. He broke down the 52 muscles in the face, learned how to isolate them all separately, and then did lots of studies on what are the universal expressions. We can get into this later. I don't think I have to get into all the theory of it now, although I love it, which is that there are the six emotional facial expressions that are universal across culture are happy, sad, angry, scared, surprised, and disgusted. Then he talks about the meshing of them. You can put 2 together. These are the emotional states. You can also think of the cognitive state, thinking, daydreaming, curious. I want to say like stuck on a question. These are the cognitive states, right? We have emotional, cognitive. There's behavioral, I'm sneezing, I'm scratching, I'm flirting. Those are facial expressions that have to do with behaviors. And then energetic states is the 4th bucket there, which is I'm tired, I'm energized, etc. So these 6 emotions are the ones that are sort of, again, universal across culture, which is I love to warm up with them. I'll note here that it's wonderful. Well, we'll talk about it a little more in terms of tips, but I'll mention it now because it's coming up, is that it's really wonderful when you're exploring facial expressions with your students to use descriptive instead of descriptive language, so that you're not saying to a student, you look angry. You're saying your eyebrows are knotted like this, and that looks like anger to me. Is that how you're feeling? And that makes an inclusive space to describe the face and give the student an opportunity to shift what they're doing or understand that their face is expressing something to you, which especially with students who aren't aware of their body or perhaps are neurodiverse or don't have the same understanding of facial expression. It's wonderful to use that descriptive language. Okay, so that's why I started with those 6 and the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. When I'm in the classroom, I like to then do a challenge and see which student remembers all 6 and try to switch it up and see who we can even, everyone goes along, oh, you're out, sit down and get to the one who knows all the 6 faces the best. We then did a game called what I call the pointer game, which is how many gestures can you think of that with just 1 finger? I've never done it in this way where people write the caption in the chat. Usually we talk about it and go around and it's an introduction of, okay, if that's 1 finger, imagine what the full body can do, right? The 3rd game, you can see all these that I had ready for you, and then it took too long. I wanted you to find pairs. This was my attempt at, in the classroom, when I've done this before, I wanted to do charades, but of course the problem with charades is that when you guess, you speak the answer. So my workaround for that is that I have cards with pictures on them and hand them out to kids and they don't know what they're getting. And they have to act out that whatever's on their card and find their match in the room, sit down when they found their match. So today, this was our version of it in Zoom. And then what's nice is they've all practiced all those things so that we can go into this new scaffold up, right? And say, okay, now I'm going to do a scene where I have a need and watch out for when you have something you can give to me. That's when, it was too loud. I got the earplugs. I was out of water. I got someone gave me a glass of water. I forgot the sneeze. I apologized. I should have sneezed and gotten the tissue. I would need to work that off a little bit more. Okay, and then we're into our talking. So that was just to go over what those games were at the beginning. And now I'm going to share some of these teaching points before we break into full discussion. Okay. What are the superpowers of nonverbal teaching? Allows for increased communication between different language backgrounds or abilities or comfort. Some of you spoke on this, that you work with folks who are nonverbal themselves. Perhaps you have deaf students, perhaps it's a mixed language background. It allows us to communicate. Physical storytelling is relatable and accessible. I love it because we all have a body. And even if our body speaks a different dialect, immediately you know how it's done. It's what I love about performing in mime. There's no fancy tech, you know? I don't need to ask a prop person for anything. And when you watch it, even though you're playing along with me and watching my storytelling, you know that I'm just doing it with my body. So there's an inherent access, there's an inherent identifying with the performer, or in our case, with the teacher. It also opens us up. This is what Eric was commenting on before. The body is the meeting place of practical and emotional, and lots of other things too, of course, but that was what I was talking about. You know, start with brushing our teeth, eventually move into let's act out non-verbally what it feels to be a freshman in high school. And then we create a nonverbal space where things have far more nuance than they might if I had to put that into words. It's empowering to discover our physical communicative power. Oh, Becky used power twice in that sentence. Regrets. But it is lovely to say, okay, at the end of this, in that class that I taught for unaccompanied minors a few times, at the end, there's about 4 sentences that I share at the end. And at the last sentence is always something like, I feel like I know you, even though you didn't say anything to me this whole hour. I know who you are and you know me, right? We know each other. And how wonderful for students and all of us to start to realize that our body is always speaking. And it feels like play, which is the best way to learn. Okay, and the final slide before discussion. What are some tools that we have to teach nonverbally? Becky, forgot the word we. All right, edits. Modeling and follow-alongs. If you hold the space, obviously, as the teaching artist, and you know they're already going to be looking at you to expect what to do next. And it's a great starting place and part of the culture of the classroom. They are looking at you. So to begin modeling for them is not so far of a stretch. That's great, Lily. I'll come back to that in 1 minute. Thank you for the question. Scaffolded or repeated structures, like that charades that we did, we can start to build a nonverbal language in the class with the games early on, and then use what we had already done together to do a second level game. A repeated structure example of that is in some of the classes I teach mime technique, you know, like the invisible object work. So I imagine that there's a box, we make a circle. I imagine there's a box in the middle of the room. I open it up, which always gets people excited because what's in the box? It's like a thing. Kids get excited about presents, right? So you open the thing and I take out a ball and pass around the ball. We're learning what I call clicking and isolation, these mime technique things. I go back to the box. I take out something else to teach, a rope to teach another type of isolation and mime technique. So that invisible box in the middle of the space is the repeated source of all of these pieces of technique. And when you don't have words to pull you back to the focus, picking an actual physical space in the room or a gesture you return to, or that invisible box that you return to over and over can replace that sort of signposting that language typically does. You also have supporting languages. Today I used pictures in the agenda. I used written text. Like I said, one of my backup plans, one of my contingencies is flashing the lights to bring focus back. Music in the room. You know, when I say nonverbal teaching, and we'll talk more about this in the think tank. I don't mean necessarily what I do, which is this class of that's totally silent. It's any sort of integration of body language and physical storytelling into your practice that can break up the class, that can get all of these benefits I'm talking about without necessarily having to do the whole class that way. You know, it's like eat less meat. You know, you don't have to stop getting a hamburger just once a week. That kind of perspective of just integrating it sometimes into your work. So written text or spoken words is fine. And there's no obviously right way to integrate this work. And you have these other languages that you can use as a support. And the physical space, for example, this being on Zoom, my spaces were the chat. You know, we've all been thinking about this the last 2 years. The chat, the virtual background, the share screen, the spotlight, the camera on and off, my finger in front of the camera, and how I interacted with my frame. In the physical space, oh, you notice too, a really good example of this is in every game, again, I went a little fast, but in every game, the background color changed to say something new is going to come now. In the classroom, I do that physically. We're in a circle and then, okay, new game, let's line up against the wall. New game, everyone sit at desks. New game, and I put, whenever there's a new game in our agenda, the body physically moves to a different place in the space. Okay, great. This is kind of the question that I want to launch into with a second group. But first, we should have a moment for feedback or thoughts on that, and maybe kind of a Q&A style. And then we'll launch into this final question in small groups. So I'll stop share. I want to also mention that in one of the small groups it was raised, you know, it's loud in my classroom. I can't do nonverbal teaching if it's loud. Yeah, I mean, there are challenges to this. It's not like, yes, you can, of course, like, you know, your classroom far better than I do, but I wouldn't underestimate the power of you being silent and giving instructions on the board and doing that thing, you know, when one kid follows along and then the next and the others want to see what's going on. There is something to setting the tone in silence and trying to get them interested. As you may have noticed in the first 27 minutes of silent practice, you want to follow along because you want to figure it out. You don't want to be left out of the game. And that's the feeling that happens in the classroom too. And they want to lean in to figure out what's going on, generally speaking. There was one other thing. Oh, and one other point to share is a lot of you that I was thinking of during the break, a lot of you said silence makes room for other things. Silence allows us to open up to other feelings or thoughts. And in my work as a mime, I also have the very strong opinion that silence makes room for the imagination of your class. Silence makes room for the imagination of your audience. If I'm quiet, what I'm actually making room for, if I'm alone, is me. If I'm with you, it's you. I'm making room for you to fill in the blanks of the ball that I'm throwing. I'm telling you that you can follow along. Let's play together. It's immediate connection that happens when you're quiet because you're trusting. Implicit is, I trust that you're going to join me and follow along and play this game with me. And it's a beautiful culture that's created when these games are introduced. Okay, Lily, yes. How do you manage behavior when that needs to be addressed? With a co-teacher who takes the person out of the room and chats with them there, because sometimes there needs to be language. At the beginning of the class, I also show them by pointing to a space in the room that I have a chair and clay. These kids are fifth grade and under, so 10 and under. And I put Play-Doh in a corner with chair, hopefully next to a whiteboard. In the classrooms I've worked on, there's a whiteboard. And I write a peace sign, which most kids know. And I show at the beginning and act out. I point to it and then I go. And I walk over and I sit down and I play with the clay. And I look around, did you get it? And I go back, do it again. And they laugh because I'm looking like a buffoon. And I go over and I play with the clay. So that if I point to that during the class, they know that's the place to go and sit. I do have I'm always with a co-teacher and prep them to say, if there's a behavior issue or kids are chatting, if you could just tag them and take them out of the room. One time when kids were getting so wild, I left the room and the co-teacher was prepped to say, okay, she's only going to come back in when you guys are silent so she can play the next game. I was out there for a little too long, but still, so working those contingency plans out in advance are great. Do I pass leadership to students? Yeah, passing leadership to students, yes. One of my favorite games I've played is about that. Once they do the charades, imagine this. We do the charades. I then have them all sit. They've acted out headphones, floss, a tissue, all the things I asked you to do. And I show that there's a mimed door. Oh, is this the one? No, I'll tell you this. I'll tell you this riff on it. I draw on the whiteboard headphones, is that a good example? Headphones, a glass of water, and a paintbrush. And I go up and I'm jogging and I'm really out of breath and I need something to drink. And I wait there needing something to drink until a student stands up and hands me the glass of water from the board. Thank you so much. You know, it's all silent, but they imagine what's there. And when they're done with that scene, I erase the glass of water and draw something new. So now there's a different menu of 3 things you can give me. And eventually I hand the marker to the student. And eventually someone else gets up and acts out the thing. Once they learn the rules and I've demoed it, that gets passed. Handing of the marker is a really clear way to do it. Or you can tell what student is excited, come on up, do it instead. But I usually model the game and then pass it to them to lead. Have I taught live in a mask during COVID? Yes, it is a bummer. What we've been doing today is really shoulders up because that's the frame we have. But of course, there are many, many games that many of you probably know many more than I do that involve the full body. And that really, really translate quite nicely, even with a mask. There's one that I really like where you make a line in the middle of the floor. This is a level up from the facial expressions, where we do happy body and sad body, for example. And I go to one side, I tag the kid, right? It's all tag or point and come here. And I go 1. And they go to smile because they remember that we learned that. I asked some other kid to come on this side. Okay, do 4, fear, great. And then I show the line and I might demo this with my co-teacher and tell them in advance what it looks like so it gets a demo. And I show that when they cross the line, they have to switch to the other feeling. And it's a full body, it's an immediate transformation. It's really, really clear. Yeah, I usually model that with a teaching artist, or I'll pretend I have the 2 kids there, smile, fear, and I'll be the smile and I'll walk. And once I cross that line, I go to fear and they laugh and they get it and we begin. So yes, a lot of games like that include the full body are more possible. It's harder to teach. I have not done a totally nonverbal class with mask on myself. But let's try it and put it into our work as think tank. Okay, any other questions before we break into groups? Questions or reflections? This was a ton of information. It'll come to you in a packet afterwards if it's interesting to you, to be a resource. But yeah, any thoughts or things that came up for you during this or questions? Barry.
Yeah, I have one. Getting back to Lily's question about classroom management, do you ever kind of respond through the silent behavior, but acting like, do you ever, if, act like I'm upset, I don't know, and start to cry or whatever, silently acting it out? And that, again, is that a attention magnet?
Yeah, I think so. I think the teacher's the model. So if they see me going like this, depending on the class, they'll either watch and it's a show or they'll do it too. So depending on the vibe, and that's the teacher intuition of is this going to make it more wild if I'm way out here? I tend to try to really pull attention by being small. Giving the kids a little, all the stuff you can do with your face, just your face. If I'm looking at a kid and do a little triple take, and the kids start to laugh, they all want to look at what I'm doing because it's small and they picked up on it and they're on the inside of it. So making my movements sort of small once I have their attention is usually the way I go, instead of big, because I worry that they'll model with me and then it'll all get out of control. You know what I mean? Yes, but I do, a lot of those behavior responses definitely are quiet. Yeah. As a dance educator, I really appreciate the connection to communication through movement. Cool, me too. Pull attention by being small. Yeah, it's that thing. It's when my friend my colleague Tasha, who got her master's in education, and all through the last 10 years, I've been like, Tasha, tell me about this. You know, I've gotten my free master's just through asking her questions. And her classic, the big breakthrough for me that you probably all already do is just, if you can never shouting. It's just never shouting. It's just that if you can hear me, I want you to have a seat. Did you know all those responses that in a quiet voice, I'm like, oh man, that makes the whole experience so much better. If you can do that, if you can hear me, do, if you can hear me, if you can hear me. And always going to humor to get their attention is another kind of thing that I love to do. If you can hear me, put your hands in the air, grab some ice cream and just put your face right on in the ice cream. Beautiful. Ooh, looks like chocolate. Yeah, looks like vanilla, delicious. Oh, like, you know, like turning it into comedy immediately makes the physical work more accessible. And then I never like to make the body something that you have to do. You know, that access statement I made at the beginning of class, move however is comfortable for your body today, happens at every class. And if a student sits out, fine. It's so important not to reinforce any ideas about power in the body. Also identifying myself as a white woman in America. There are all kinds of layers to that, of not wanting to be a part of a history of holding on to and colonizing other people's bodies, even in my language. Elise.
Hi, thank you. One of the emotions that hadn't been touched upon is frustration. And I find, especially now teaching in classrooms where kids are all masked, they jump right into anger because they don't understand frustration. And working nonverbally helps a lot of students who can't find the words. But there's also the ones who only work in words, who working nonverbally makes them more frustrated. So I've just wondered if you'd encountered any of that and what pearls of wisdom you have.
That's a great question. That's the first, and then let's open it up to others to answer that question. I'd love to hear others' thoughts on that. My first reaction is that it always is set up like a game. Is just that everything we do is a game. It's for fun. I think that framing and having fun with it releases some idea of I'm not doing the activity right. And it is all from a perspective of play in terms of the basic culture of the room. But I want to think more about what you're saying and respond more fully, Elise. Any other thoughts on her question of if a student, and to interpret in my words, like if a student finds that working nonverbally is actually quite frustrating, how do we release that frustration or transform it or avoid it in some cases? Any other ideas?
I think it's what I mentioned before, that a lot of times, you know, we are not humans, even the little ones are not comfortable with stillness and silence. And so I love what you were saying about framing it as a game and as play, which is improvisation, right? Play is about improvisation. And it is actually a skill. You know, when you think about, there's this great book I'm sure you've all read about the 13 thinking tools of the world's most creative people, which was a transformational book for me. But that idea of play as a skill. So, you know, giving our students more opportunities to, you know, kind of have that play. And we have to teach them, we have to give it to them. So I think framing it in that way is a good thing, but it's practice. And I think frustration happens when we're not used to something and we feel uncomfortable with it. So if we're able to, you know, maybe it's only going to come with doing it again and again, because it's like getting used to the temperature of a new bucket of water, kind of, right? And it will happen because we do go to play. We find joy in it. And I defy anybody, you know, after a while to not find some joy in, you know, a playfully framed experience.
Yeah, thank you. And if I know, another additional thought that came from what you're describing is, if I know the access needs of the classroom that I'm going into, and I know who can use their hands, who can stand, who is verbal or nonverbal, always returning through the lesson plan of something you know everyone can do. Everyone can do that follow along. Everyone can do the happy face, or at least the happy eyebrows. Or if they're not with it, they're the nice thing about nonverbal is if they don't move their face very much, that's okay. You go to the next person, and most of the kids get it. You know, that we don't lose out if they're not participating so much, because they also want to, that it's this inherent guessing game when we're quiet, but they want to follow along and figure out what's next. Sherry, you would have thought.
I find for myself that being completely silent is not natural to me, but if I'm allowed to use sound effects.
Cool.
And so I give the children who are really frustrated with just trying to act out a scene or communicate that way, and say, you can add a sound effect, just no words.
Mm-hmm.
And so then if they can go, "Ooh," boom, they're still communicating with their body, but they're getting they have a little bit more opportunity to communicate in their own way.
Thank you, Sherry. And something that just blared through my mind that I didn't say out loud, which is, in that scenario, I would teach it in silence. I mean, when you can, and if you can design it that way, because if you're saying to me, I can talk and give you directions, but you can't in this exercise, it is that immediately in my head gets frustrating, because how come you can talk and I can't? So even writing the instructions on the board, drawing them, pulling someone aside and whispering it in an ear, we create a culture where we're all the same and we're all figuring this out together, instead of putting someone on the spot and here's the challenge. Love this. A little side coaching to land a success in the child's experience. Yes, a success helps a lot. One little success can crack a hard nut. I love it. Cool. Okay, let's do a final round of breakout rooms. Welcome back. Welcome back. Before our closing reflection and gesture, of course, there's a closing gesture. Art, I know it paused for a minute. Do you still have something you'd like to share? I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, thank you. I wasn't sure if like that had gone through or not. But yeah, I just wanted to share that I've had some success, obviously depending on the classroom activity, of just like addressing beforehand of like, hey, kind of allowing kids the space to just, hey, some frustrating feelings might come up. Invite that feeling, like just engage with that, or even in the moment, if I notice that there might be some frustration, just speaking to it, because a lot of times our students don't know how to do that for themselves. So just speaking to, hey, you might be hearing a voice that's saying, I'm not good at this. I can't do this right now. Take a moment to just tell that voice, like, hey, I hear you. And like, you're welcome. And we're just going to work past this now. And just, I think like making space for those emotions is always helpful. That's
great. Great advice. Yeah. Thank you. Oh, I'm glad you weren't frozen for that. Cool. Okay. Yes. Yes. Okay. For the next 2 minutes, if you would, share any, I'm just going to put it on this Jamboard, to gather some of those thoughts that came up in your group. What do you want this toolkit to include? You can just unmute yourself, and I'm going to add it to our bulletin board here.
I would like to add.
Go ahead, Rosie.
I would like something about teaching in masks, because I don't think that's going away anytime soon.
Beautiful. Thank you. Elise?
Yeah, I have a list, so it's good that you type faster than I do. We had a request for transitional games for transitions, games across curriculum, power downs, cool downs, another transition after an activity. Games with a focus on inclusivity with special populations.
Thank you.
Games for gestural greetings,
Mhm.
grade and age appropriate games. And then something came up about doing assessments and case studies to focus on the efficacy of where these games work best and which work
Mhm.
best. Thank
I
you for
love that.
typing all that.
Yeah, thank you. Yay. This is exactly what I was hoping for. Thank you. More.
We discussed having not only adjustments for Zoom, but also adjustments for the hybrid modality where the students, where the teacher is virtual, but the students are not, and they're either on individual devices or as a group.
Love
so that's
that.
sort of movie style.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
I can speak for the other people in the group. A lot of they were addressing dealing with trauma, both one for immigrants that are in trauma, but just general trauma, and kids, and how to help, how to, I don't know if it's help them or, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe somebody from my group wants to chime in, fill that out, but that was a big theme.
Yeah, just like helping students through times that might, like maybe specific instructions that might be confusing, or when we were reflecting on going back and forth between like the slide and the chat, where some people kind of got confused, like how would that, just to be trauma informed in a moment like that for us. Yeah.
If I could bring up one other thing, the idea between the difference of collective trauma, which everyone has experienced, and the individual trauma. And if there are games that somehow allow that individual to be worked on, and then games that allow the cooperative collective trauma to be worked on.
Love that. Mm-hmm.
A resource kit for visual aids, because written word is also really verbal communication. So a resource kit for visuals. Good.
That's a great idea. Something I'm interested in too is teacher, when the teacher can instruct non-verbally, even if the student isn't responding non-verbally. When can it, maybe it isn't a game, maybe it's a process of instruction that includes some of these techniques. Yeah, beyond the games, teacher instruction.
I also think that it would probably be good, I'm not sure how, to figure out what the interface is with sign languages.
Mm-hmm.
How they are used or not used.
Yeah, nice.
I'm really interested in decentralizing the leader, the teacher, and so how are we getting the voice so that it's not always teacher centered?
Great. Excellent. Cool. Let's pause there. If you have more thoughts, that's what the survey's for. Thank you for that insight, and it's a perfect to-do list, a perfect agenda for the working group. After we do our closing gesture here, we will send you we'll put it in the chat now, Madeline, if that's okay. This is a two-part survey. You may have been to another think tank that the survey is a registration for the follow-up working sessions with me. This is two parts. First, there's 5 questions of just feedback, which would be very helpful for me, for the working group, and for me as a facilitator, if you have 5 minutes to do that. And then the second section it's at the bottom, it says, do you want to be involved in the working group, continuing this work together? And you can press yes, no, or maybe I'll fill this out and be in touch with me. And that second has another 5 questions of what time zone are you in, what's your availability, etc. Over the next 6 to 8 months, I depending on the group, I want people to be involved however they want to be. So if you want to come as outside eyes once every month, or give feedback on a draft of something and have totally asynchronous involvement, that's okay. If you would like to meet every 2 to 3 weeks and work on something, we also might decide, okay, let's wait until May to do things based on schedules. It's all very up in the air right now. What I'm most interested in that is your interest. If you would like to be involved, I would love to hear from you so that I have some help on this toolkit. Okay, so to close, let's do a little gesture together. Yay, a little offering at the end of class. Thank you, everyone. Class, think tank. Thank you for being part of this think tank and for your insights and help. I really think the thoughts here, whether or not you're involved going on, your thoughts today have set me up really well to put together this toolkit that I think is going to help a lot of people in a lot of classrooms. So thank you for your generosity and presence today. And I hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you, Becky, and thank you all for joining. Please take a moment to fill in that survey if you do have just 5 minutes, and especially if you want to keep working or co-creating or helping with this toolkit as it gets created. And finally, if this is sparking ideas for you and you're like, oh, I have this thing we should touch on, email me, because we are always open for think tanks or for people to host something. If it feels a bit scary and you just have a concept, we can work with you to make it something that you're ready to share. It doesn't have to be a big scary deal. So if you do have a thought or an inkling as to what you might like to do, feel free to reach out, and I would love to hear from you. So thank you all. I will close the session now. I'll leave a moment so you can save the chat if you want to in the bottom right-hand corner. I'll give it about a minute, 2 minutes, and then I'll close the chat. So thank you all.